South Korean lawmakers have voted to impeach President Yoon over his failed martial law attempt earlier this month.
Syrians mark the first Friday prayers since the downfall of Bashar al-Assad as interim leaders map the country's political future. Volodymyr Zelensky slams airstrikes on Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure as cynical Russian terror.
In Georgia, an electoral college largely dominated by the ruling Georgian Dream Party has elected Mikhail Avelashvili, a former football player and a right-wing populist, as the country's next president. However, this election comes amid ongoing unrest. For over 2 weeks, anti-government protests have rocked the country, sparked by 2024 parliamentary elections and by the government's decision to delay Georgia's EU accession negotiations. Outgoing President Salome Zurabishvili has expressed solidarity with the demonstrators, who have faced violent crackdowns from the authorities. The authorities have targeted not only protesters, but also opposition, activists and journalists. Regardless, protests are ongoing in the streets of Tbilisi and other major cities of Georgia. Tornike Koplatadze, Euronews, Georgia.
South Korea has voted to impeach President Yoon over his failed martial law attempt earlier this month. The motion passed with 204 votes in favor, 85 against, 3 abstentions and 8 invalid ballots.
길은 늘 국민 속에 있습니다. 그것이 대한민국의 역사입니다. 그래서 대한민국은 강합니다. 오늘 의원님들께서 받아들 투표용지의 무게가 그 어느 때보다 무겁습니다. 역사의 무게이고 민주주의의 무게입니다.
It was the second impeachment vote in the space of a week. President Yoon survived the first vote after the majority of the country's ruling party boycotted the motion, which means it did not reach the minimum 200 out of 300 votes. His presidential powers will now be suspended until the Constitutional Court decides within 180 days whether to dismiss him as a president or restore his powers.
Syrians have observed the first Friday prayers since the dramatic downfall of President Bashar al-Assad. The gatherings illustrate the dramatic changes that have swept over Syria less than a week after insurgents marched into Damascus. The main insurgent force, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, has worked to establish security and start a political transition. The group has tried to reassure a public concerned about hardliners among the rebels. HTS says it's broken with its extremist past, but it's still considered a terrorist group by the United States and some European countries. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with allies around the region and called for an inclusive and non-sectarian interim government. In Baghdad, Blinken met with Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani, saying both countries wanted to ensure the Islamic State group doesn't exploit Syria's transition to re-emerge. Volodymyr Zelensky has said Ukraine's energy infrastructure was hit by one of the largest Russian attacks, but that the country's systems were being restored. According to Zelensky, Russia fired 94 cruise and ballistic missiles and almost 200 drones at Ukraine on Friday morning. 81 missiles were shot down. Zelensky slammed the strikes as cynical Russian terror on the country's power facilities. Russia fired at critical infrastructure in the western city of Ivano-Frankivsk, prompting authorities to shut off power for central heating and hot water. Officials say that according to preliminary information, Friday's strike is the largest on the city since the start of the war. And in the southern city of Odessa, authorities say air defenses shot down all Russian missiles. There was some damage to civilian infrastructure from falling debris, but no reported injuries or fatalities.